Hello, I'm Ray Smith. This is going to be a demonstration of some saxophone maintenance, repair, and adjustments that I often have to do with and for my students that I think can be helpful from a pedagogy standpoint for our teachers. So I'm going to direct the camera down to the table where you can see what I'm doing. You'll only hear me from here. This is coordinated with the chapter in my saxophone pedagogy book. Okay, we're going down. Let's start out with some simple maintenance and care things that we can do with our instruments. And one of the things that I have really found to be useful in the last while are these things that we call key leaves. There are certain pads that always are down. When you put it away in the case, the pads are always down. They're closed. In other words, a lot of the other pads are always open. The ones that are open dry out nicely. The ones that are closed, often when they dry out, they get stuck. All of us have had our G sharp key stick or our low C sharp key stick and so on. This is very ingenious. Rulon has done a good job with this, I think, but by putting this under the C sharp key, I'm holding up the C sharp key so that it dries out, but it also holds up the G sharp key. See, this would normally be closed, and you can hear the slack in it. And just that one pad, that one prop, that's the word for it, one prop holds up the C sharp key and the G sharp key, both the biggest problems that we have, and they dry out. It also holds up the E flat key with the other part of it. So when I take it out, then those things will come down, but that gives it a chance to dry properly. And those are the pads that usually go bad first, especially the C flat key. I always dump out my saxophone at the end of playing just to make sure there's no puddle of water down there in the bow of the instrument. When I put it in the case, then it's just going to run right into the E flat key if there's water there. So I try to make sure that isn't there. And so this is a little ingenious thing that helps to protect those pads. I'm also using the vine at the top. These are little pads. It looks like that one slipped out when I mess with it. These are little pads that are little props that are holding up the F sharp pad, and then this one's holding up the E pad. Okay, that one's out, and then this one's holding up the F pad, this one the E flat, and now the last one the D pad. It's a little collection of props that you can put under those instruments. They're similar to the ones that are used, the one that's used for the soprano. Oh, easy. Let me show you that. What's this soprano? So this does the same thing on the for the low C sharp. I've got this prop under the C sharp key. It's holding the G sharp key up at the same time. Let me take it out so you can see it. And it's got a little bump there. It's got a part that fits in the hole, kind of sits into the tone hole, and then the other part hits the tone booster and holds it up so that the C sharp's held up and the G sharp is held up, and that will really help to get rid of those sticky keys. I haven't had nearly the sticking problems. In fact, almost none since I started using the key leaves. So I would recommend those. Let me show you another thing. Let me take off my neck here. I think that there are different swabs that you can use, and I think it's a good idea to swab the horn at least periodically for cleanliness. I'm going to put this on the strap here so I don't drop it. This was an ingenious swab that was actually invented by one of my students, former students, working for the Cannonball Saxophone Company. And you can see that the swabs are small up here and big at the bottom. Well, I dropped the side that's small into the bell. It's got a little weight on it. Drop it down to the bottom. Turn the horn and get it to come back up to the top. Let me get my cord tangled up here. There it comes through the top. I've got a pull cord on both ends. They call this the dragon swab. And now I can drag it through this way, pull it back through the other way. It's like toweling off your back after your shower. You go back and forth like this. And those little swabs, a bunch of them, oh, don't try to pull it through that way. You get it caught. It's always got to come back through the big side, through the big end first. So that's a great idea. The only place you can get that is at the Cannonball Saxophone Company, but they do have those. It's called a dragon swab. I think that's by far the best swab I've ever seen. They also have wonderful polishing cloths, and you can kind of keep the keys and the finish of the instrument wiped off. I'm not very good about this, but I think it is a good idea. And wiping off all those rods and so on will help a lot with corrosion over a period of time. So I think that's also a good maintenance idea. Okay, let's see. Let me put this back on. There's one more thing that I'll mention about maintenance on the instrument. Some of our instruments have silver on them. And for example, this soprano, the keys have silver, but they're starting to really tarnish. You can see it, especially on this low C key. Ideal to put in the case, and I had these in there, but they kind of got worn out. But the strips that you put in silverware that prevent tarnish are a really good idea if you've got an instrument that has any silver on it. And I can take a little bit of silver, a little bit of they call this silver cream, but it takes off that tarnish, and I can rub it on there. And I got a little wide there. And then I can take a paper towel and buff that off, and it's become really beautiful silver again. All that black tarnish is gone. This is a lot of work if you've got this on all your keys. It's much better to take some prevention if you can. So that is another maintenance thing. If you have any silver keys or the silver body, I would definitely take some precautions. Look how nice that key looks now compared to what it was before. Nice and silver. So that's a good thing to realize. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the repairs that we often need to make. The first is the octave key. We're just working down the horn. I guess if I did first, I'd talk about the cork. Let's do that first. The cork, over a period of time, cork can compress, and sometimes maybe your mouthpiece gets really loose on it. That's probably the right time to have the cork re-corked, redone, replaced. However, a makeshift repair that can give it some new life for a while, keep a lighter around, and if I come through here and I warm up the cork, if you get it too close, you'll catch it on fire. Then it will, not the end of the world, but it will go to its demise much quicker if you catch it on fire. Rather, just warm it up. What that does to cork is it puffs it up. When it puffs it up, you got enough for you. I do this to my alto every now and then because in fact, you may have noticed I've been using two different necks. I could do this differently, but because I have the luxury of two necks, I put the jazz mouthpiece on one neck and the classical mouthpiece on the other neck. Unfortunately, they're usually not the same diameter. Put your classical mouthpiece on and it cramps down the cork. Then you put your jazz mouthpiece on and it's too loose. If that were the case, I would do one of two things. The right repair for that would be to have a repairman help you remount that classical mouthpiece a little bit so it doesn't crimp the cork quite so much, so it can sit on the same size as your jazz mouthpiece. The other thing you could do is kind of take up a little bit of slack inside your jazz mouthpiece with fingernail polish, and maybe do more than one coat, whatever it takes, and kind of make it a little smaller so it fits better You can resize those bores just a little bit. But if you have had your cork get depressed, then you could puff it up again with a little bit of heat. Now, the octave key on this, I'll bring this down just a little more. So I don't want a lot of play in the octave key. When I touch this, I want it to immediately open the key. That's the adjustment we're talking about. But if I have it too tight, it could open accidentally, especially if I don't have quite the right rotation on the neck when I put it together. It could open when I don't want it, or not quite close all the way tight. So I do want just the tiniest bit of play. You can see that this mechanism has a little tiny bit of play. And this is not a hard adjustment to make, because holding down the pad so the pad doesn't get bent, I hold this down tight with my finger, I can pull up on the octave key bail, and that will give me a little more play. Or if I have too much play, I have to take off the neck to do this. But if I have too much play, then I can hold down that neck, hold down that pad, and then push down on the octave key bail to bring it back down just a little bit so that I take up some of that slack. It's not very precise. You might have to go back and forth a couple of times, but you can get it to where you have just the right adjustment, where it has the teeniest bit of play, so you know it's not going to hang you up, but then it has instantaneous response. That's where we want that octave key to be. The other thing that can go wrong right here is a lot of times the neck gets too loose in the receptacle. If that's the case, you want to tighten it up. Now, repairmen do have ways of making this a little smaller, or making it a little bit expanded. They have an expander where if it's too loose, they can expand that a little bit. But one of the ways you can do this, and these are just things we can do in a lesson or at a gig, makeshift. Take a pair of pliers. By the way, this is a pair of pliers that has no teeth, so it doesn't mar the surface so much. If your pliers have teeth, you're going to want to cushion the teeth so they don't mung up. But I'm going to tighten that up. Without the neck in there, I'm going to tighten it all the way up. Then when I loosen it back up, now the neck is going to fit a lot tighter in that receptacle. And you don't want to leave that loose. First of all, you don't want to be following it around. If you're on the alto or the tenor or something, you don't want to be like it's moving around too easily and you have to follow it. That's always a problem when you're playing. But the other thing is that will leak. Years ago, I used to work a little bit with David Straubinger, a great repairman in Indianapolis. And David actually, I couldn't do this because I don't smoke, but David would actually blow up a balloon, tie it off, small balloon, twist it into the bail so that the bail's completely tightened off, finger a low B flat, and blow cigarette smoke into the bore of the instrument. And he could see where things were leaking. And I was quite dumbfounded when he first did that on my alto, that it was leaking like crazy, smoke just pouring out around the neck fitting. So that can leak in there. You don't want to leave that loose. All right, some other basic repairs that we have to do quite often. Pads, that's probably our biggest hassle. I mentioned some preventative things for pads, but what about when you've got a pad that's sticky? This happens all the time on the low C sharp key or on the G sharp key. I don't think I have anything really sticking right now, but let me just show you a couple of things I would do for that. First of all, we want to clean it off. A lot of people talk about cleaning off the pad with cigarette paper. This is really a bad idea. Sorry, cigarette paper will work. What I was talking about was a dollar bill. People talk about using money. If you use a bill for this, I'm going to take out a piece of this cleaning paper. This is Yamaha cleaning paper. And let's say that the C sharp key was sticking. I could put the paper in between and then apply a little gentle pressure and pull it out. And it will clean off the surface of the pad and the surface of the tone hole at the same time. Now, people talk about using a dollar bill or money for that. I just think the problem is the paper consistency is great on a dollar bill, but the problem is money goes through a lot of hands and it's dirty. and using a dirty thing to try to clean something is not the most ideal idea. So I would avoid using money unless you've got a really nice new clean piece. So that's one thing we can do, is just take it off. Let's see, where did I put that? I was going to show you. Yeah, this is pretty hammered, but BG makes a little pad cleaning thing that's made out of chamois. This is pretty cool. This one is really worn out, but I could put this under my C-sharp pad here. They're usually a little stiffer. This has just seen its day, but I'll show you this. Put that under there, put a little general pressure on the pad and pull it out. That really does a nice job cleaning. I like this. It's made out of chamois. This is stuff you'd use to work on your car finish. That works really well. Now, some of these pads, like the G-sharp pad or the C-sharp pad, can just not respond to those treatments. It may still be a problem. In which case, here's a little kind of extreme thing that I do this quite a bit though. I know I pulled out a couple of things for this. What did I do with them? A couple of Q-tips. There they are, blending into the table. In this old Listerine container, I actually have a little, this is seals nice and tight, so I can keep it in my repair kit. And what's in here is Old English furniture polish, lemon. And so I'm going to go in here, I'm going to get a little fingernail polish, I'm going to get a little bit of Old English furniture polish on this Q-tip. And then I'm going to go in on the surface of that pad. I'm going to swab the surface of the pad and the surface of the tone hole. And this is really good for cleaning it and for applying a film that will keep it from sticking for quite a long time. That is great. Sometimes I'm working on a close pad. I'll take my pliers and I'll smash down the end of the Q-tip because it's too thick to go under the pad. And so I'll smash that down good. And then I can use that. I'll get the furniture polish out, and then I can use that to go up under some of these tighter pads at the top. They're sitting a little closer to the body of the instrument than that C-sharp was. But you can see the stuff that came off of that. That's probably because I put this on before, but I sometimes will follow that up with this. This is called JS Magic Dust. I don't know what it is. It looks like graphite, but it's kind of a black thing, and it has a little brush applicator that's kind of cool. And that little brush applicator, I can just go in and put a little bit of that on the surface of that pad. I'm following up my treatment with the furniture polish, and that really helps to keep that thing from sticking. And I use that especially on those keys that stick the most, like the low C sharp, the G sharp, and the bis key. Those are the pads that often get sticky, or the first finger key will sometimes get sticky too. So that's just a little tip on that. Those are some things I do for pads. Sometimes a pad will just get gummy and you got to just replace it. There's like nothing you can do that's going to help it. Sometimes we get a mechanism that is not moving freely anymore. Now, I don't have any of those to show you, but I've had plenty of them in the past. And let's say that it's in here. Let's say I push this down, but I feel kind of a little hitch in there, and it kind of comes up sluggishly, or sometimes it actually sticks down, and it's not moving freely like it needs to move. In that case, I'm going to take off. I'll show you how I do this. This, by the way, is a spring puller. I don't know if how well you can see this, but it's got a notch in the end of it, and then a hook. So I can use the notch to push springs, and I can use the hook to pull springs. And so before I take out the screw on this, I'm going to want to release that spring. Now you need a collection of little screwdrivers. This is where I need it maybe. Now I'll bring it down a little more onto the table. I need a collection of little screwdrivers like this, and I can then, oh, by the way, on that spring hook, before I leave that idea, that's a professional one there. You can see that that was commercially manufactured, but I have some that I've made myself. This is a crochet hook, and I've done the same. It already had the hook, of course, and I took a 3-cornered file and filed a notch in the top of it. When I'm dealing with a smaller, closer situation, that one can be more helpful, because sometimes this is too thick. Sometimes this is too thick to get it in where I want it to be. And I've got a yet even smaller crochet hook that I've done the same thing to. So I've got different spring hook pullers there. Now, can you see what I'm doing? I think you can. Let's come in a little closer. So I popped that spring off of there. Now I'm going to take out the rod. This is called an axle rod assembly. This was a great invention in the early part of the 19th century. Revolutionized how they made instruments. And I'm going to pull that out of there once I get it. I'm not quite there. Come on. I go just a little further. That slot used to be a lot easier when I could see. That's not quite out far enough yet to pull it out. Come on. Can't stay in that little slot. We'll get it here in just a minute. I like my black horns, but it makes it even harder to see what I'm doing. I believe that, yeah, that's out now. Okay, now I can take my pliers, would be the easiest way to do that, and just pull that out of there. It looks like it can use what we're going to do to it because it's pretty, got a lot of wear on it. You can see that this has a lot of black wear on it. It's been oiled, but when it's wearing, it gets pretty black. So I'm going to wipe that off. Maybe you can see better now what was on it. I'm going to clean it off. Let's say that this was sticking, and that's the kind of stuff that'll stick, make it stick, is all that grime. And then I bring this, oh, I bring this out, and I'm going to use a pipe cleaner. And sometimes I'll put a little bit of oil on as a solvent. By the way, this is a really great oil applicator. It cost me $4 at the Woodwind Brass one, and I can put a little bit of oil on the end of my pipe cleaner. Most of this stuff you can get very cheap. You don't have to go through a expensive supplier. I'm just putting a little bit on there so it acts as a solvent, especially if I've got stuff that maybe is starting to dry up or gum up. That can be helpful. And then I'm going to go through there and I'm going to clean out, bending on me here. I'm going to clean out that rod, that axle I should say. I cleaned off the rod already. Let me clean off the other one too. Yeah, these have got a lot of black in them. This is a very simple way to deal with keys that have gotten gummy, sticky gummy. Okay, now, oh, it's still putting black on my table. Come on here. I have to clean that better. I'll leave this on the paper towel. Okay, now I can put it back together. And I'm going to put it back together with some oil, new fresh oil on it. I cleaned off the grime. And if I needed to, I could put some oil on this and then rub it off more. It was already plenty loose. If it was a little bit tight or gummy or dried on, then I would take my oil and use it as a solvent and then wipe it off good. All right, let's see if we can get this back in the situation we need again. And I'll just get this started, so it's kind of holding that in place. Okay, now I want this to go in with some good oil on it. So the part that's already poking through, I'm putting a little bit of oil there. And I'm going to put some oil along the rod all the way up and down, just enough that when it goes in, it'll distribute well. Let's see if we can get this one back in its place. To just get it straight, if it's a little slanted or not quite lined up right, it's not going to move properly. Okay, let screwdriver go. Now I can just tighten that back up. And a little more light over here, I think. Make sure these are moving freely. They are. When I got this too tight, this started to get a little bit hard to move. Huh. Oh, I must have just lost my power on that light. I'm sorry. Hopefully you can still see this okay. So I backed it off slightly so that this would be moving freely. They don't have the spring on them yet, but they're moving freely. And then I will move them a little bit like this to kind of work the oil in. Oh, I was going to show you another thing about pads while I have that on. Now I put it back on. Well, before I redo the spring, let's take it back off. Yeah, let's take that back out of there. Where's my slot? I was going to do that while I have it out. Anyway, that's how I put it, and then I put the spring back on. We'll do that in a minute, but I wanted to show you on the pad. Come on. Now my other light went out. Looks like the battery went down on it. And now I can't see as well. Okay, there we go. No? Well, I don't want to take your time. Maybe we won't bother with that. I'll put the spring back on. And I'm using the other end now where I can push the spring. Uh-oh. I didn't take the caution I needed to there. I've got to take it out anyway because it's on the wrong side of the key. There's no way to get it on the other side of the key without taking this back out. By the way, I got some little screwdrivers like this. I got some little drivers like this at the Home Depot. Not Home Depot. Harbor Freight. Cheap. And they work really good for these larger screws. On a saxophone, we have a lot of larger screws, so it can work pretty well. Oh dear. I just can't see how to get in the hole. There we go. It's kind of this way, I think. Well, you know what? That's going to take me some time. I need to do that when I'm not taking your time. But you get the idea. I've got to get that spring back around where it belongs. These don't have any spring on them right now, but I've got the spring on the wrong side of this key, and it won't go underneath. So I'm going to have to take it back loose. Make sure as I put it together, the spring is back where it needs to be. Springs, by the way, can lose their spring, and they actually can even get brittle after a while. And if your spring gets brittle, then it could break. It could just break off. Then you've got to go to the repairer, and you've got to get the repairman to put a new spring in there. Most of us don't carry a supply of springs around with us. However, I carry rubber bands with me, and once in a while I've been able to, when I had a spring go out at an inopportune time, I've been able to rig a rubber band things that'll make the pad work long enough to get me through the gig I'm in or wherever until I can get to the repairman, and then I'll have him replace the spring. Sometimes the spring will lose its tension, where you can put a little more tension on it by bending it the opposite way a little bit, and then it'll pull back a little harder. You can bend it. The way the repairmen do that is they take a pair of pliers and they crimp it along a little bit instead of just bending it. They'll just kind of crimp it a little bit at a time with their pliers, which actually works better, especially with a flat spring. This is a needle spring here. Flat springs, that works really well for the flat springs to use the pliers that way. The needle spring, if it is brittle, we might run the risk of breaking it. If you want to just oil your keys, this is a wonderful way to do this. This one is a Yamaha, it's a small key oil thing that I can keep in my repair kit. I do keep this in my larger box, but in my small repair kit, I keep this one, and I can oil things as I might need to. And you'd be surprised if your keys are getting noisy, how much a drop of oil on the keys will help. Just oil up through there and then work them a little bit, work it in, and it'll quiet down a ton. Sometimes that's your rollers on these little rollers. These are easier to see. Sometimes you get a roller that gets noisy. That one's a little noisy. You can hear that you can hear it popping back and forth. So if I put a little bit of oil on each end of that roller, this is a way to keep it from going all over the place. But now if I work that, I work it in. Might take me a little bit more working it in here. It's starting to quiet down. You have to get the oil to work along the length of it. Still there. I could also take a pair of pliers and pinch that slightly so that it doesn't have that play in it. Part of it's the play, but you can actually take that quiet down a lot of things with a little bit of oil, and then wipe off the oil off the surface of your key. Okay, well, what I was going to show you with the pad, and I think you can imagine this, you can see it on your own instrument, that when you look at the pad, it has an imprint in the pad. That's what we call the seat of the pad. The seat of the pad is how it hits into the tone hole. If you have a pad fall out, the likelihood of getting that seat right back in the right rotation where it fits perfectly is really small. You can eye it and do the best you can, but we don't really have a precise way. We don't really have a precise way of making that work. So the best thing to do if a pad falls out is replace it. But we do have to do makeshift things many times, and to get us till we can get to the repairman. And if it falls out, I'll put it back in and I'll try to eye the rotation and get it just right. You know that the pad cup has shellac in it. This is shellac. And if I heat this up, if I had the pad off, I was actually going to do this. I'm going to take the pad out. But take the pad out, I would just heat it up. The heat with my lighter would let the shellac loose, and I take the pad out. We don't want to do that typically. I was going to do that just to show you, but what usually happens is this gets old and kind of brittle, and then the pad finally drops out. Sometimes it's because it's gotten cold, hot so many times and what have you, I don't know. I try to keep my instruments, even my saxophones, at more even temperatures as much as I can. Don't leave it in the car in the summer. Don't leave it in the car in the winter. Take the pains to bring it in the house. Anyway, if I need to, I can put a little more shellac. I carry some of this in my pad, in my repair kit, and I can heat this up with my lighter. And see, I can drop a piece. That's what that looks like, the shellac, when it was hot. A little bit of it came off on that paper towel. Now, got a little bit of it stringing off here. If I need more of this in the pad cup, I can drop a little bit more in the pad cup before I put the pad back in. To do that, you've got to take the pad off. But without taking the pad off, you can put the pad back in the very best you can, get the rotation where you think the seat's going to work, and hold the pad closed so it doesn't move on you, and then take your lighter and heat up the pad. If it gets a little black on the key, don't worry about it. You can just polish it right back off. It's just a carbon deposit. No big deal. It's not permanent. And you can warm up that shellac in there again, and then it will adhere. And then I would just put a little gentle pressure down on the pad so that it reseats into the glue, and hopefully you've got the seat so it fits into the tone hole, but that's the hard part. So that deals with quite a few things. Let me deal with a minute in case you lose a little cork or a little felt. This happened on my alto last week. I suddenly realized that when I hit my high F palm key, let's bring this up a little bit. Suddenly realized that when I hit my high F palm key that I was hearing click, 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 metal against metal. It's like, oh, what happened here? Sure enough, my cork's gone. Couldn't see it on the floor here anywhere. I carry a little bit of sheet cork like this. This is just a little bit of cork, and I can cut a small piece off. Well, that's just a smaller piece of the same thing. But I carry stuff like this in my repair kit. And if I've lost that, what I did last time is I took a pair of scissors and I just cut off a little teeny bit of that, and then I put it back in, glued it back in. Now, you have to be careful that you're not getting it so thick that the pad doesn't open enough. If you do, it is possible to take a little piece of sandpaper, like this. It's just a little piece of fine sandpaper, and I could stick that underneath that. I don't want to put any sandpaper against the finish of my instruments, and make sure that I've got the other side against the finish, and then I put the sandpaper against the cork in between there. I can't tell you how much easier this was when I could see better. Oh, I see, this is crumpled over. Darn it, let me use the other hand. Why isn't that going in there? Okay, I put it in there, put some pressure down on the pad, not too hard, and then I pull my sandpaper out a little bit. It'll take a little bit off of that cork, and I can adjust. I can adjust how thick so that it's opening enough. If it's opening too much, you can always put a thicker piece of cork on it and bring it down. Sometimes felts will drop out. Let's say that this felt between here's my the C key, and it pushes the bis key down. There's a piece of felt on that. If that dropped out, I'd be in a world of hurt, so I'd have to do something to replace that. By the way, if you just go to Home Depot or Lowe's or somewhere like that, you can buy a lot of these little felts already cut. These aren't made for saxophones, but it's this cheap way to get some of these felts, and they come with they're already stuck, have sticky stuff on the back of them. You can also get little corks like that. And I just keep some of that material with me in case I need it for something, and then I can replace a felt. Now, those come with their own sticky stuff, but it's not as sticky as I'd really like it to be. The way repairmen do that is with contact cement. This is really the best way to do it. This isn't a fast glue, though. If you've ever been in a shoe repair shop, then you've smelled this stuff. This is what they use, but the way this is used is you put a little coat on both surfaces, and then you let it dry. It takes about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes at least for it to dry. Once the surfaces are both dry, you stick them together as a good bond. Put them together when they're wet, forget it, it's not going to work. You have to put them together when they're dry. So it is possible to use super glue. It's not quite as ideal as contact cement, but for makeshift repairs like we're talking about, you could use a little bit of super glue. And glue those felts back in, or those little corks back in if they've fallen off, or put a new piece on. Okay, you don't have those kind of supplies. It's not too hard on the internet now to find out where you can get some of those kind of supplies. So if you've got a little piece of sheet cork, you've got a little bit of resin, the shellac type stuff. You can find these things. By the way, I use this for makeshift repairs. This is just, of course, your waterproof tape, your medical tape. What do you call it? Adhesive tape. And I keep a little bit of this in there, and I often keep a little. Well, like there's a little piece stuck on there. It's too big actually, but sometimes I'll cut a bunch of them while I'm doing it and have them around the rim. So I just have little pieces. And sometimes when you just need a little bit more to make this adjustment right, you can just stick a little piece of adhesive tape in there. When you go to the repairman, they can do it with the right stuff, the right way. Let's get into some adjustments that we need to do quite often. I've already mentioned about adjusting the octave key. That would be the first thing I'd check. I don't want to have anything that on my octave key that where it's not closing all the way. That's going to wipe me out right away. Let's talk about the other adjustments. It's going to be a little more difficult to see on the black instrument, but let me just try to illustrate this anyway. If I push down my C key, there's another pad up here that has to go down with it. Those both need to be down tight at the same time. If they're not, if you push this down and this got a little bit of play in it, that's trouble. Same thing with your first finger. I put my first finger down, pushes the same pad above down. They've got to meet at exactly the same moment. Now, many people aren't lucky enough to have the adjustment screws I have. But I've got adjustment screws in here, small screws, that I can do as little tiny adjustments on that if I need to make those seal. If not, then you have to do it with cork thickness or a piece of adhesive tape or whatever. Something to take up a little bit of thickness so that those meet at the same time. The other thing that can go bad up here is when like I mentioned, I push down that C key, it pushes down the bis key. If that doesn't go down tight, see the key, C is actually pushing the pad below it down here, and then underneath it, it's pushing down the bis key. That's got that pad between the C finger key and the bis key has got to be the right thickness so that goes down tight. There's no adjustment screws on any horns for that. If you have a problem with that, you might have to put a piece of adhesive tape in there until you can have a repairman do that with the right stuff. But that's got to be tight. Then as we go down, we have adjustment screws. Everybody has these. The adjustment screws, let me bring this down a little lower again. The adjustment screws here, one of them, if I push the first finger of each hand, anything on the bottom hand for that matter, puts the bis key down. This is why I can play B flat 1 and 1 or B flat 1 and 5. I can even play at 1 and 6. And if that isn't going down, I'm okay if it has the very slightest bit of play because I don't want it to be holding up anything down here on the bottom stack. But if it doesn't go down all the way, if it isn't fairly firm, we've got here's the arm that puts that down. All these keys press that arm. There's a screw on that arm. I can tighten that screw just a little bit and it will bring that down at the right time. A lot of people say, I don't care, I never use that. But it does affect your altissimo G and other notes up there if you don't have that in adjustment. Sometimes it'll backfire when you don't realize that that's what's getting you. The other adjustment down here is for the G sharp key. So if I press the G sharp key, this pad opens. I'm leaving it open. Anything I push on the bottom hand closes it. This is a critical adjustment because every low key, if I press the low B flat key, the low B key, the low C sharp key, they all press the G sharp key. Well, obviously you don't want the G sharp key open when you're playing low B flat. So if you want that to speak right, this adjustment has to be in perfectly right. Sometimes you say, man, my low notes just are out of adjustment. There's something leaking down there when it's your G sharp key. So I want to be sure that that screw is, and the idea of these screws is not to tighten them up. The idea is to have it just in exactly the right place where two things hit at the same time. Now see right here, if I get this too tight, then it'll hold up my pads on the bottom stack here and cause me a lot of trouble. If it isn't tight enough, it's going to cause me trouble on my low notes. And I can't use the articulated G sharp where I can trill like F sharp to G sharp without moving my G sharp key. Or it messes me up if I want to say I'm slurring from E down to a G sharp. I put my G sharp key down on the E. That takes out one variable. Well, if I don't have that in adjustment, I'm not going to be able to do that. So I would adjust it very slowly, just a little at a time, until you find a perfect spot for that, so that the G sharp closes when you put anything on your bottom end down. Now, your bottom stack, they all have the same thing happening as the upper stack here, where if I press the first key, the key just above it has to close. Press the second key, the F sharp key, the key has to close. It's the same key. And if I press the third key, it should also close. Those should all be an adjustment so that they all meet at exactly the same moment. Unfortunately, most horns don't have adjustment screws for this, so you may have to do this with makeshift adjustments. But I actually have adjustment screws down here for all of those. Beautiful. And I can just put those back in adjustment if it comes out a little bit. There are repairmen who have kind of negative thoughts about having those screws. Oh, if you have those screws, then they go out of adjustment. My thought is, they go out of adjustment anyway. And it's nice to have a screw to put it back. Not have to fool around with trying to get the right cork thickness, or putting tape under there to try to get the right thickness so that they close when they're supposed to. This, can you see it? This is what's doing that. Every time I push one of those keys, it pushes this up, and that's what's putting that key down where it's supposed to be. Ooh. Now that one doesn't feel quite perfect. I probably need to work on that. So here's there's one other one down here I need to describe. I'm going to show you how I check the horn out. When I'm fingering low B, if I lean on the C sharp key, it should not move. So I have to be sure I'm holding the B key down tight, and then lean your hand, make sure you can see this, lean your hand back so that you're pressing the C sharp key and the B key at the same time. The C sharp key should have no play on it. Now, most people today have this screw. I didn't have it on my Mark 6 horns. I took it to Dave Straubinger, and he made me a key on there. I've done this with a couple of different keys, to repairmen, I should say, where I've had that put on. I had it put on 3 different Mark 6 horns because they didn't have this adjustment screw. I think most modern horns do have that adjustment, and that screw right there is what's going to determine if my B and C sharp meet at exactly the same time. So this is how I would check out a horn. I'd play a G where I have my other hand where I can touch the octave key. Okay, no problem. It's sitting down tight. Then I'll play the first, I'll find this key just above the B key. I'll play B, and I'm touching the other key above it. Should make no difference to touch that. Same with the C. Then I'll play the G again, and I'll touch the bis key. Make sure there's no play there. If it makes a difference, then you've got an adjustment you need to make. Then I'll check my 1 and 1 B flat. Push the bis key, or a 1 and 5 B flat. See if it's making any difference. Then I'll check the G sharp. To do that G sharp key, I'll play a low D. Press the G sharp key alternately, and it should make no difference. If it is making a difference, you got to do something about it. Let me bring this back lower again. Now I'm going to check out the bottom stack. So I'm going to put the F key down with my second finger and touch the key above it. And then I'll do the same thing with my third finger and touch the key above it and the third finger. Let me find it. There it is. I'll make sure that all those are working. And again, you say, well, that may not bother me at all. Well, certain altissimo fingerings use that third finger instead of the second, and it can come back to bite you. So I would check those out. They should all be an adjustment. If they make any difference, you've got a little work to do. And then the last thing I'm going to check is I'm going to go down and play the low B. I'm leaning on the C sharp key while I'm playing low B. That kind of gives you an idea of how that how I'd go down and check a horn and just make sure it's playing for a student. Let me just show you light. Repairmen have a little different kind of lights than this, but this is a little piece of rope light. I think I paid about 10 bucks for this little piece of rope light. You plug it in, and you can drop it down in the bore. And then I can look and see, close my pads up, do I see any light leaking out? If you see light leaking out, there may be there's going to be a leak there, of course. If light can get through, then air can get through. And I'm going to check my bottom here, and you have to have it a little bit darker. A little darker when you do this is a good idea, so you can see if there's any light seeping through. And I would check it on both sides. Once in a while, you find a pad where you've got a little light seeping through on this side, but not on the other side. Maybe the pad has been slightly bent, or maybe the pad has warped a little. I mean, the pad cup itself, the key might have been slightly bent, or perhaps the pad has warped just from drying, wetting. Now I'm going to push the rope light in from the other way so that I can check my low B and B flat. When I push B flat, the B I should see no light there. This would be a good cue to press the low B key and lean on the C sharp key. And do I see any light coming out of that C sharp key? So a light can be useful in analyzing. If I determine that I've got let's say this pad seems to be tilted slightly. It's a little vulnerable. It doesn't have a guard around it. And let's say that it's leaking on this side, but it's not on that side. I can use what we call a pad slick. And these come in different sizes, but this is a pretty good size for saxophone. I put the pad slick on the side that's sealing, and then I'm not going to do this because I think this is sealing pretty good. Ooh, stay there. Then I can push slightly, just gently on the other side, and tilt the pad cup slightly so that I've got no light on either side of the pad. Those are some things that are really not that difficult to do yourself, that you can do in a lesson or you can do at a gig if you need to. Most things it's better than to take it to the repairman and get it done better later, but we often can't just have that luxury. We have to make it work now. I've been at many recording sessions where all of a sudden I had a situation and I had to repair it now and keep functioning. I couldn't say, well, wait, look, can we reschedule for another day? I got to take this to the repairman. This is not how it works. At least it shouldn't. So, I don't know, we covered everything. I think those are most of the things I wanted to demonstrate. I've got descriptions of all these things with a little more information and so on in the book. It won't be anything I forgot in the book. I may have forgotten something here today, but this gives you an idea of a few of the tools you could have. Most of the things you can just get at a hardware store, or you could get a couple of those things like sheet cork or resin, or the pad slick. You'd have to get those from a repair type place, or an oil bottle, you know, those kind of things. But I think you get the idea that there are many times when it's helpful if we have a little bit of repair knowledge, and I hope this is useful to you, and that you can try some things yourself as you need to. Don't be afraid of it. It's just a machine. And if you mess it up, it can always be fixed. Anyway, good luck. I'll sign off and see you in another video.